welcome to this session about karate beyond API testing. My name is Benjamin Bischoff. I'm a test automation engineer at Trivago in Düsseldorf, Germany. I've been in tech for about 25 years, and after being in tech for 15 years, I slowly transitioned to the world of test automation and software testing. So that means I'm writing a lot of software to test other software. I'm responsible for test pipelines and a lot of things like DevOps, cloud technology, all around the testing topic. And my blog is at softwaretester.blog, where I write a lot about testing and software engineering topics. Also, I wrote a book about karate, which might be important in the presentation going forward, because I have a lot of examples that I've taken from this book and made available to you so you can experiment with it a little more. A little disclaimer first, I am not directly associated with Karate Labs, the creator and the vendor of karate solutions. I'm focusing solely on the open source portion of karate. I will also show a lot of code. It is all either Gherkin or maybe a little bit of Java or JavaScript, but that is basically it. I will also not cover the setup part of karate, which is usually really simple. They have a lot of tutorials around that. The purpose of this presentation is not to show you the basic core stuff that karate can do, even though I will touch on that at first, but to show you what karate might be able to do that you may not know yet that it even exists. Peter Thomas, the creator of karate, said karate strives to reduce the entry barrier to writing a test, and more importantly, reduces the friction to maintain a test because of how readable tests become. And that is actually the crucial points. The readability of tests is really, really nice, as you will see. So what is karate? Well, it is based on the Gherkin syntax. You might know Gherkin from behavior-driven development. That is the given, when, then syntax, where the given is the setup part of a test, the when are some actions that you do, and the then is the result and the assertions that you can do. Usually there is glue code necessary. That means code that connects the English language steps to some programming code, so those two can correspond, and you can describe in English what should be done, and then your code executes. It is not necessary with karate because all the necessary code is already in the framework. And also this is very, very important. If you run a lot of tests, you have built-in parallel runs. So nothing that you have to add on to the basic framework later, but it is built in. And you have the Java and JavaScript interoperability. That means that you can extend the framework capabilities by using Java and JavaScript. But I will touch on that a little later. And everything is JSON. So when you work with data, especially native JSON data, this is supported in the framework, so you can directly interact with it, put assertions on it, and even if you work with other kinds of data like XML, this internally is represented as JSON, so you can use exactly the same assertions against JSON and XML. So let's go through the tests. At first, because this is Karate's core thing, is API tests. And to show you a simple API test, I'm using an API that gives me a list of coffees. I will every time go through the code. I show you step by step, so hopefully it will not be too complex to understand. This is how a typical test would look. You have a feature file. This is a file name .feature. This is a collection of test scenarios, usually that belong to the same topic or business case. And then you have one or more scenarios in there. This is called pure API test, and this is how it looks. So to access an API, you use the URL keyword and then just specify the API endpoint. In case if you know the typical Gherkin syntax, this would be the given step. But here you can just use a star instead of the keywords, which make the scenarios much more concise. So this accesses the URL, and then you can specify a method how to access it. In this case, it's a get method. You can also use a post, a put, all of the HTTP verbs. And then we just print the response. The response is automatically available in this response variable, so you don't have to do any conversion. And then you can do an assertion on it. This is typically done with the match keyword, and here again the response status is automatically filled by Karate. So whenever you use a method on a URL, the response status is automatically filled, and if it's a 200, it's all okay. I can also show you this. Here is my test scenario that I just showed. I'm using Visual Studio Code here because VS Code has an extension. This is called Karate Runner, which is a free extension for Karate. Karate Labs themselves, they have a paid extension that you can use for VS Code or IntelliJ IDEA, but for the sake of using purely open source here, I'm sticking to the Karate Runner. So that gives you the run option above a Karate scenario. And when we run this, you see in the logs that it is successful down here. And you also see that we are getting the JSON response with the different kinds of coffee. And if you want to see that in a nicer way, not in the logs, we can check out the Karate report. And let me move myself a little down here so we can see that this test scenario was executed. It was successful. And here are the test steps, and if we now click on the response step, we see the same JSON response. I can also show you what happens if I make this fail. We expect a 500 response here, and I run the same thing. You see that we now have an error, and if I go back to the report, here now we have the response status 500, and we get an error message that is pretty easy to understand. The match failed, and that 200 is not equal to 500. So this is how a failed report would usually look. So what you can see here is that the method to describe the different steps for an API test is usually very, very straightforward and very readable. But we can go a step further than that. We can use UI-based test. And for this, I use an app, an online application called Coffee Cart. I can also show you how this looks. This is just a simulated shop for coffee. So I can just add coffees to my cart. And here I have my list of coffees. If I move myself up, you can also see that we have a total here. And this application I will use during the next tests. So let's start with the Coffee Cart API. And the Coffee Cart API is kind of an API. For this application, it uses a JSON. So here it is just the file list.json that I can also open in the browser, make it a little prettier here. And this is how the structure is for the front end. So this could also be API endpoints, also different endpoints that the site hits. I deliberately use the Coffee Cart app because it's very straightforward to see what's actually going on with the data. So if we look at this in detail, we have the different coffee products here, and each coffee has a name, which is also displayed on the front end, a price and a recipe, and this is the different colored bars in the coffee cups that show you how much espresso, how much milk is in the different coffees. And also we have a base URL, and the base URL in this case is conveniently the same for the front end and the API. And this we can define in Karate's configuration. So in a typical Karate project, you have a Karate config.js, which returns a configuration object. This is essentially a JavaScript object where you can add any configuration parameters you want. So in this case, I specify base URL, and this is the URL of the application. Here in the comment is the local application. This is just a fallback in case the online version doesn't work. I could also deploy it locally, but luckily so far we don't need this. But whatever is in the configuration is automatically available in any tests, in any test scenarios directly. So let's go back here. And this is how the API test for this API could look. Again, we have a test scenario and the URL, but here we do not specify the base URL as the URL itself, but we use the base URL variable that is automatically taken from the Karate config. And because it is a /list.json, we can also specify a path. And path is again a Karate keyword to specify the path portion of the URL. And then it's exactly the same. We use a get method again. And here you see already the power of Karate. Again, the response is available in the response variable, but we can also just save it in a custom variable that we define. So here I say def products equals response. That means I take the response that I get and save it in my products variable. And this we can also print out again. So print products will give us the same JSON again as before. And then you can do matching on this response. So here I make sure that the first response from the JSON is an espresso by checking the name property. And here I can do some further karate magic. It's using JSON path on the inside. So you can also use JSON path operations. So here I define the variable only the names and get the name property of every element. And this is automatically converted into an array of names. And then I print this again as product names. And to make it clear, I can also show you how that looks. So I'm running the exact same test. And going back to my report. This is not the right one. Let me use the karate extension to open the right one. And here again we have the JSON response as before. And here we have only the product names as an array. So again, it's quite straightforward. I mean, this syntax is a little bit special, but no rocket science. But if you use a JSON path in such cases, it's very straightforward. So you get exactly the data that you need. And this will come in handy a little later. So now that we tested the API portion of the website, yeah, I know it is kind of a basic test of the API. We could do much more with karate, but for the sake of this demonstration, I decided to keep this relatively simple. Karate can do UI tests, and UI tests run in real browsers. So if you have used something like Playwright or Selenium or any technology that can work with browsers, you know the drill. And UI tests can either test the UI itself, so the different components and if they behave correctly, or it can also test through the UI. And this is more what we are doing. So we are testing data and the UI together, which makes a full end-to-end test in our case. And if we look at the site itself, how it is set up, the code, we can see that it has data test IDs set up. And this data test ID can be used to target the specific elements, like the headline of each product. And this is exactly what we need. Of course, Karate UI can target any locators that you want to use. We can use CSS, we can use IDs or link texts or XPath, whatever is best for your case. And here we can also target the total, and the total can be found with data test checkout, which is also very convenient for our tests. And let's go even a step forward and test the payment window, the modal window that opens up when you want to pay your purchase. And this can be found via a class, CSS class, which is called modal content. So now we have everything together to target our elements in the test. And this is how it looks. So again, the setup is exactly the same with the feature and the scenario. The only difference is that we configure a WebDriver. And we configure Chrome in this case because Chrome is most flexible. And if we don't want to test the UI itself, Chrome is a very good choice. Of course, if you want to test that a UI behaves the same across different browsers, it is necessary to also test on other browser engines. But you will also see why I'm using Chrome here. And this is using the local Chrome. Of course, it's also possible to run those tests against test grids or in Docker containers. And we're using the base URL again because, like you saw, it's the same for the API and the web app. And with the driver keyword, we can open the website. So this would open a new browser window with the base URL. And then we can target the elements like this. Here we use the click method to click on the element that has the data test ID cappuccino, as I showed you. So this will locate the element with this locator and click on it directly. And the nice thing again is that we can save those locators also in variables in Karate. So here I define a checkout button, and then I do not do an action on an element, but I just locate the web element with the data test ID checkout, which is the little checkout button that we have. And then I can run a matcher on it again, like on an API result. So with checkout button.text, I get the text inside this button, and I check that it's a total of $19. Yes, it's a very expensive coffee we have here. And because I have this in a variable, I can now also click the checkout button. Here I use the variable and then .click. Instead of using the click method with a locator, I use an element and click on it. And then because this payment window will appear, I wait for it. I wait for the modal content CSS class element. And then I want to match the text of the first headline in this window, which should be payment details. And then I can take a screenshot. So it would basically be you click on cappuccino, and then we assert that it's $19, and when we click on this, the payment details window opens, and then we have the payment details headline. Now let's see if this works. And we should see that there is a browser window that opens quickly the application and then clicks through it. It's very, very fast. And when we look at the Karate report, everything is green, and here's the screenshot method. And when we open that, there is the screenshot of the final result. So we can even see, okay, the total is okay, the payment details window opened, all good. What if we want to combine those two? We want to combine the API and UI test now. This is not a problem. But there is one thing that makes it a little harder in this coffee card application. I can show you if we go back to the beginning and I click 3 different coffees, you see that now we get a notification up here. It's your lucky day, get an extra cup of mocha. So it's a promotion thing that we don't want, because the goal of the test should be to see which products are sent over by the API, and then verify that those products are actually displayed here in the front end. And I don't want to deal with this promotion thing. So we have to handle that as well. This is how the promotion data looks in the JSON. So we have discounted true, and we have the name with discounted in front of it. So those two things can point to a discount that is displayed after you put 3 products into the basket. So we could use both of those things to handle the discount. I will use the name in this case. So again, we open the URL and the list.json, which is our API, then do a get to get the JSON data. And then I use the same little JSON path trick as before to get all the names of the products in an array. And then, because we have this JavaScript interoperability in Karate, I can just define a filter function that I want to use. Here I define the filtered product names function. And this can take the product names and filter for any product that does not start with discounted. So when I apply this filter, it will filter out the discounted products that I don't want for my test. And here I open the website again, the front end, and then I can locate all the elements that are a headline of the 4th order. And all those names like espresso, espresso macchiato are H4 elements. I checked this before in the website, so I can just locate them all. But this gives me the elements. That gives me the full elements. I'm not interested in the full web elements of the headlines. I'm just interested in the text portion. So here I can do another trick. I create an empty array called product names web. And then I can do a loop on the product's web elements. And for each of those elements, I use the Karate append to function. And append to, what it does, it takes an array that is already there and appends a specific value to it. So here I want from the product, which is the web element, the text, and I want the trimmed text. So if there are any spaces or white space characters somewhere on the front or the back of the name, I want to trim them away. So this only gives me the names that are displayed on the website, and the filtered product names gives me the names from the API. And then all I have to do is match those. So here I check if the product names web are exactly the product names from the API. So if I run this again, you see it opens the website, and before that it hit the API, and all is fine. So we have the exact same products from the API that are then displayed in the front end. If I do not filter the products here, let's just do that for a quick test. So if I, instead of filtering the products, if I just take the original product names, this is including the discount, you see it fails. And then you also see that the filtered product names and the product names do not match. And you can also see a screenshot which is automatically created in case of failure. And you even see that the lists are not equal because the discounted mocha is appearing here. Wonderful. So, what's next? Mocking. And mocking is very, very powerful, as you will see in the next example. But let's quickly go through mocking. And mocking means that when you hit an API endpoint, you do not get the real data back, but you get data back that you define yourself. So I took the real JSON response that we got before and I modified it. So we have only two products left, the beautiful morning that I defined and the sip happens, excuse the puns. So I'm defining my own two products here. As you can see also in my test project, I have this JSON. And then I want to use this as a mock. And the very, very cool thing about Karate is that it has built-in mocking and it uses the same feature and scenario syntax for this. So what we have here is I create a feature that is defining my mocked data, my mocked response. And the @ignore tag in the first line signals Karate that this is a feature that should not be executed because this is not a test, this is a definition of a mock. Then I define the course variable. I configure it as true because this prevents any cross-site access thing that you might hit when you use a mock in a real website. And it has to be in a background in Karate to work. And here in a mock definition, a scenario means a little different thing because you can define conditions when some mock should be used. So this is not the scenario name, but it is a filter, basically. So we can define that when the path matches list JSON and the HTTP method is get, then we should use this products JSON, which is my own defined data, in case of the real response. And when you define the response variable like this, this is automatically used as a response by Karate. And the last one, which is a scenario without any filters, is the fallback. So that means that whenever I hit a path that is not list.json, I get a response status code of 500. So here I can then test this mock. And for this, Karate has a built-in mock server. So what I do here in this mocked API scenario is I define a variable, or in this case, it's not a variable, it's actually a function I define, which is called start coffee mock server. And with the Karate start method, I can just give it the mock feature. And when I start this later, this mock feature, I get a port back. And this port is crucial because we need this port to point our application to this port. So our goal is to run the real website with the mock that is running locally. So this is where I actually start the mock server with call once and then the start coffee mock server method that I created a line above. And then I point the URL to my local host with the port that the mock server is running on. So now I can do the exact same thing as before. I can test the API with a path list.json method get, make sure the response status code is 200, which is okay, and then print the response. And then I do the fallback tests. So I use another path, in this case whatever, with the same method get, and match that the response status is 500. So this might sound a little complicated, but once you try it, it gets really straightforward. You see that it is successful, and if we now look at the logs, you can see that here it's starting a server. It dumps a lot of code and initializes the server, and then you can use the mock server, and you actually see that it's running, in my case, on port 56605. And it actually works. And if we check the response, we actually get here the response that I defined before, which is awesome. But this is only part of the magic, because now we have a mocked API, but the goal is to use this so we can test that the front end is actually working correctly without relying on real data. And this is crucial when you deal with dynamic data on websites that you cannot really predict before, and which is not deterministic. So if you provide your own data source for a real web frontend, you know exactly what data is coming in, and you can run your tests in a deterministic fashion every time. So this is how it works. Mocked API and UI test. As you know, we can start a Chrome WebDriver, and here we do a little different thing. We start with a blank page because Chrome needs to be running in order to intercept future requests. So we run it, we open Chrome with a blank page, and then we can define driver.intercept and give it a pattern when it should intercept. So to keep it simple, I say whenever we want to request any JSON, please use our mock feature. And that is it. That is the whole thing. So with driver intercept, we can use our own mock. Then we hit the real base URL, and For demonstration purposes, I do a screenshot. And then I can try clicking on Beautiful Morning and Sip Happens, because the application is actually generating the data test IDs based on the data that is coming in, which is really cool for testing. And then I click on any element that has card 2. So I can show you, this is this thing up here. So when I start this application and I put 2 products in it, it says card 2. And with this abbreviation, with this syntactic sugar that Karate gives us, with the curly braces, I can find any element that has card 2. Click on it. I wait for the URL called cart. Again, I can show you when I click this link, the URL actually has cart in it. And then I check if the total, as before, the data test ID checkout is $11, because I made my 2 coffee products cheaper. So we only pay $11. And then again, I take a screenshot for demonstration purposes. So let's see if it works. So it should open the website with a mock. And we can verify this in the screenshot that we now have on the real website, which is available on the live URL. We use our own data, Beautiful Morning and Sip Happens. And later we have a total of $11 as expected. And we could, of course, run many more tests on the front end, go through all the products that are here and check if they have the correct name and the correct value and the total. But this is how far I wanted to go in this example. Now let's go to another discipline of karate, which is visual testing. And visual testing is essentially a screenshot comparison. So instead of taking web elements from the website and asserting different properties on them, you take a screenshot of the complete website or certain elements and compare them to baselines. So to images of those components or complete websites that look like you want them. And then you can detect if there are layout shifts, even if you have the correct data, because if you have large tables with data on the website, it might be quicker to just take a screenshot and compare it to a screenshot of another table with the data you expect. So you can see pixels shifting, and this is sometimes much quicker than going through the data step by step. So here you need a baseline image. So I took a screenshot of the website as I expected, and then I can use this baseline image to compare against a certain state of the website. So again, this is old news for you by now. We use the Chrome driver and go to the base URL. And then just to show you that you have different options on the driver, I set it to a certain width and height and a position of 0, 0, which is the top left corner of my screen. And then I click on the cappuccino. I take a screenshot again, but in this case, I save the screenshot in a variable because I want to have this available to compare to the baseline. And with the compare image functionality, I can use the base.png baseline image that I created before and compare it to the latest. And this is the bought coffee, and the bought coffee is my current image. So it's comparing. So this is my screenshot, and here is the image comparison, and it says the second image is 0% different compared to the first, which is cool. And you can even look at the image here. You can look at the baseline. You can have the slider here, which shows you the differences between the images, but it's exactly the same image. So let me not click on the cappuccino this time, just to illustrate what happens when it fails. There, it fails. And this is how it looks in this case. You see that in the div now, in the corner, we have this pink overlay of the pixels that are different. And it says the image is 0.17% different compared to the first. And we can also check this when we slide here over the total, that it is different, because in our baseline we expect that we have a cappuccino in here, but in our current state of the website we didn't click on cappuccino, so there is a difference. And you have multiple options how you can display this, and you can even go to the baseline image and define areas that should be ignored. But this could be a completely different talk just about this feature. And the last one I wanted to show you is performance testing. Because every karate test that you write can be used as a performance test as well. Karate has a bridge to the performance testing tool Gatling, and with minimal additional configuration you can take any karate test and make a performance test out of this. And I'm using Maven for my project setup. I'm a big fan of Maven. And this is what you need to use Gatling. Just the Gatling dependency, which is called Karate Gatling, which has the same version as the Karate version that you use. And the Gatling Maven plugin, which is used to run those Gatling tests. And this has to be pointed to a class which has the Gatling performance simulation, because you want a certain number of simulated users over a certain period of time that hit a certain API or a certain website just to test the performance. And this points to the API performance class that I will show you in a moment. This is this one, and this is all the code you need. This is just a Java class that extends the Gatling simulation class. And here you point it to a karate feature. You can also pick certain scenarios in a feature file, but here I just use the very first test I showed you against the coffee API. And then I set up a simulation. I use 100 users over a period of 10 seconds. And again, this could be a whole 1 or 2 hour talk in itself, just to show you performance testing. But I just wanted to show you how easy it is with how little code you can actually do this. And because this is triggered by a separate Maven plugin, we use Maven to execute the simulation. And I also created a separate Maven profile called Gatling that includes the dependencies that are necessary. So now we can actually run the karate tests as normal karate tests, or when we use the Gatling profile as a performance test. So for this, I go to my terminal and I trigger the test with Maven. And you see that the first time you use this, it downloads the dependencies. And now you see that this API is actually hit multiple times. And we have built success. And here in the logs, you have the results of the performance tests, which is very nice. And you have a separate report. And if we open this report in the browser, this is a Gatling performance report. So we see the number of requests, which is 100. We see the distribution along the timeline in the 10 seconds that I wanted. And we can see a lot of different information. If there were some responses that had a status other than 200, which is not the case here. So it's a pretty stable API. But you will see that if you run those simulations, that at one point you will have errors in your response. And this is a very good indication how much load your API or even your front end can handle. So yeah, I know that has been a lot in a short time, but this was not to make you an expert in all of those things. This was just to let you know things, features of karate that you might not know of. Because it is actually much, much more powerful than advertised. So what exactly did I show you? I showed you API tests, I showed you UI tests, how you can combine API and UI tests, that we can do API mocks, that we can use those mocks in UI tests of real web applications, and that we can even do visual testing of UIs and use karate tests as performance tests. And you have seen that all of those things can be accomplished with minimal amount of code. So I have all of those examples for you in my GitHub. It's under Bischoff Dev, which is my GitHub handle, and then /karate UI, or you can scan this QR code and access all of this. Just try it out yourself, see how easy it is, modify the examples, create your own, and you will probably see that this can be of real use to your projects. So thanks a lot for listening to me, and I wish you a great rest of the day.